Spring came slowly to the high plains, not with a trumpet's call but with the hush of patient footsteps. The snow retreated in slivers and ribbons, curling back to reveal stubborn blades of grass and soft mud tracks from deer passing through. The land, quiet for so long, breathed again. It did not burst into bloom. It healed. At Gideon Hart's ranch, the days stretched wider, softer. There was laughter now, not often but enough, stitched into the hours like thread through cloth. May, barefoot in the early warmth, skipped stones across the river that edged the pasture, each toss a note in her recovered song. Tess leaned into her work like a woman remaking the world by hand, fencing, riding, planting rows with Boone that ran straighter than any he'd made alone. And Clara, always moving with a rhythm that no one dared rush, carried something in her presence that made the walls of the house feel less like a shelter and more like a home. No one mentioned the Hollow brothers anymore. Not because the fear had vanished, but because it had shrunk to a manageable shape. The threat came and passed, and in its wake bloomed something harder to destroy, dignity, forged by refusal and steadied by kindness. One morning, Boone placed a hand-drawn map on the kitchen table. Tess leaned over it, brow furrowed. "That's the ridge we cleared last week," she said. Boone tapped it. "It's yours now." Gideon signed it over. "1 parcel each." May gasped softly, and Clara paused in her movement near the stove, eyes lifting. Boone didn't make a show of it. He simply pushed the map toward them and said, "He figured you'd want something no man could take back." That night, none of them slept easily. Not out of fear, but out of the strange weight of being seen. All their lives they'd been things to be managed, bartered, silenced. Now they were something else, owners, builders, authors of their own script. And Gideon, true to form, did not ask for thanks. He only worked the land beside them, hammer in hand, heart buried deep behind quiet gestures and unexpected grace. On the morning of the first full thaw, Clara rose before the others. She pulled on her shawl, stepped out into the pale dawn, and walked the length of the old fence where they'd once stood tied, frozen, waiting to die. The fence still stood, but it was changed. Gideon had mended the posts, not to erase what had been, but to transform it. New beams, carved railcap, wildflowers planted at its base. It was not a monument to pain, but a declaration that survival had bloomed here, that the past could be both remembered and rewritten. She stood there for a long time, her fingers trailing along the wood. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply breathed in the clean air, the sound of robins in the branches, and the scent of wet earth rising like incense from the grass. Behind her, boots crunched. "You came," she said without turning. "I wanted to see it finished." He stopped beside her. Gideon wasn't dressed for work. No gloves. No tools. Just his coat, worn at the cuffs, and a quiet stillness that felt like reverence. "It's different now," she said. He nodded. "You made it so." She looked at him, her gaze soft but steady. "No. We did." There was a silence then, but not an empty one. A fullness. The kind that fills in the gaps between what is said and what is meant. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, as if measuring the weight of each word. "You don't owe me anything. None of you do. I know. But I still want something." She turned fully now, facing him. "What is it?" He met her eyes. "Time. With you. Not because I rescued you, but because you remind me who I want to be." Clara didn't rush her answer. She never did. She simply watched him, reading every corner of his face like a letter she'd waited a lifetime to receive. "I was broken once," she said. "Not from cruelty, but from being unseen. You changed that." He stepped closer. "Not touching, not yet. You saw me, too." "I didn't try to," she whispered. "You just wouldn't stay hidden." There, in the early light, with the wind gently lifting her shawl and the rebuilt fence standing sentinel behind them, Clara reached for his hand. It wasn't a grand gesture. Just fingers meeting fingers, palm to palm, like two notes finding harmony. Back at the house, May prepared coffee, humming her way through a song Boone had taught her. Tess rode out to check the cattle, her silhouette proud against the ridge. The fire crackled low inside, and something about the sound made the place feel lived in, almost sacred. Later that day, the 5 of them gathered under the cottonwood tree beside the barn. Boone brought a jug of cider. May brought bread warm from the oven. Tess carried a new saddle she'd crafted with her own hands. Clara sat beside Gideon, not pressed close, but near enough. They didn't speak of the past. They planned for the spring. They spoke of which soil turned best under which moon. Of planting lavender by the porch. Of whether May might teach Boone to sing or whether that would simply scare the chickens. Gideon listened more than he spoke, but when he did speak, it wasn't from behind a wall anymore. "Family," he said once, raising his cup. The word landed gently, like a feather on water. No one needed to explain it. No one needed to agree aloud. The bond had already been forged. As dusk fell, the stars blinked back into view. The sky no longer looked so far away. Clara leaned into Gideon's shoulder, eyes on the horizon. "They thought tying us up would end us," she said. "They underestimated you," he replied. "No," she said. "They underestimated what kindness can grow." He looked at her then, and in that gaze was something deeper than admiration. Something quieter than passion. A respect tender and unshakable. "I spent my whole life building fences," he said. "Now I just want to plant things that climb them." She smiled. Not the shy smile of someone unsure, but the knowing one of a woman who's seen storms and chosen, still, to open her windows wide. The world didn't shift on its axis that night. No miracles fell from the sky. But something sacred did happen. A man who thought himself too cold to thaw let love root itself in his chest. And 3 women who had once been cast aside found a life built not on rescue, but on shared strength, steady hands, and the long, patient light of a frontier morning. Some stories do not end with a kiss or a gunshot. Some end with the quiet planting of seeds, and the deep knowing that they will grow. And somewhere, just beyond the cottonwood tree, the wind carried that knowing out into the wide open plains, like a promise spoken softly, over and over, until the land itself remembered it. The sun bled slowly over the horizon like an old wound reopening across the plains, casting the town of Sable Creek in hues of burnt gold and copper. It was the kind of place where time didn't march, it limped, and even the wind moved with a tired sigh. There, on the edge of this dust-bitten stillness, stood a modest garage with a sign faded by sun and memory. The paint once declared, "Marshall's Auto," but the letters had chipped away, much like the man who now carried the name. Inside, beneath humming fluorescent lights and shelves cluttered with bolts, brake pads, and tools older than some of the trucks they serviced, worked a man with hands darkened by grease and eyes shadowed by stories he rarely told. He was lean, perhaps 33, with shoulders that bore more than the weight of engines. His name was Caleb, though few called him that. Most just said the mechanic or that single dad with the girl. And he never minded. He'd once worn a wedding ring, now, he wore silence in its place. His daughter, Elsie, was 6, a wisp of a thing with hair the color of wheat before the harvest and a laugh that made even the sun seem lazy by comparison. She filled the quiet with stories and drawings, angels with smudged halos and cars with wings. Most evenings, she sat cross-legged in the corner of the garage on a little folding chair, crayons scattered like fallen leaves around her. She spoke to her mama's picture in the same way her father did, gently, with reverence, as if afraid too loud a voice might wake grief. Caleb kept their world small. A tidy upstairs apartment above the garage. Morning routines marked by coffee and cereal. Evenings spent watching the same old westerns on a tiny screen with a warped volume knob. It wasn't much, but it was safe. It was whole, in its own way. And yet life does not respect stillness for long. It was a Tuesday when the fire came. One of those days where the heat curled the edges of paper and people walked slower just to survive it. Caleb had just finished replacing a timing belt when he heard the screech. Long, sharp, and final. A sound that yanked the breath from your chest before you even understood why. He was already running before the second sound came, the metallic shatter of impact and the rising scream of fire. Beyond the ridge, a car had veered off the road, flipped into the drainage ditch just past the diner. Flames bloomed fast and wild, licking skyward as if trying to tear the sun from its place. Others stood frozen on the sidewalk, mouths agape, phones clutched uselessly. But Caleb didn't stop. His boots hit the asphalt like a drumbeat of purpose. He climbed the guardrail and didn't hesitate. The car was on its side, flames devouring the rear end. Black smoke poured from the windows. He yanked the driver's door. It wouldn't budge. He circled around and saw a boy, no more than 5, curled like a frightened bird in the back seat. His small fists beat against the glass. Caleb didn't think. He slammed his elbow into the window again and again until the world became nothing but broken glass and blistering heat. He reached in, arms screaming from the burn, and pulled the child into his arms. The boy didn't cry, didn't speak, just clung to Caleb with all the strength his tiny limbs could offer. By the time the ambulance arrived, Caleb's arms were scorched red, and his lungs ached from smoke. He barely heard the questions the paramedics threw his way. He was too busy holding the child, whispering soft reassurances as if the voice alone could rebuild something. At the hospital, after the child was wheeled away and the adrenaline began to bleed from his veins, Caleb asked a nurse one quiet question. "Was anyone else in the car?" She shook her head. "Just the boy. No ID. No name. He's stable. Lucky." He nodded. Said nothing more. Drove back home in silence, his arms wrapped in gauze and his heart heavy in a way that didn't feel unfamiliar, just unwelcome. That night, Elsie crawled into his lap without asking. She touched the white bandages on his hands and whispered, "Did it hurt, Daddy?" He smiled faintly. "Only for a minute." She nodded solemnly. "That's how you know it mattered." He kissed her forehead, tucked her into bed, and sat beside her as she drifted to sleep, tracing the worn edges of a drawing she had made that afternoon, an angel holding a boy above fire. He didn't remember her drawing it, but it was there, vivid and fierce. Upstairs, after she'd fallen asleep, he poured himself half a glass of lukewarm whiskey and stared at the photograph on the mantel, the one of a woman with a laugh frozen mid-motion. His wife, gone nearly 3 years now. Pneumonia had taken her in a cruel winter, and Caleb had never quite forgiven the cold for it. "I pulled a boy from a fire today," he said to the photo. "Didn't even think. Just ran." The room was still. Even the crickets outside seemed hushed. "He's about Elsie's age," he added. "Didn't speak a word." He wanted to say more, but the words choked. So he sat there, letting silence nest in the corners of the room like old dust. He was used to talking to a woman who never answered anymore. It didn't make the words mean less. The next morning came quietly. Sunlight filtered through the blinds and narrow ribbons. Elsie insisted he stay home and rest, but he went to the garage anyway, wrapping his hands in clean gauze, slipping gloves over them. He worked slower that day. But he worked. That's what you did when your heart was heavy and the world still needed turning. No one came by. No phone calls. The boy from the fire remained nameless in his mind, like a ghost who hadn't yet decided where to haunt. In the stillness of the afternoon, Caleb stood beneath the hood of a pickup, the radio murmuring some old country song about leaving and returning and all the hurt between. He wiped sweat from his brow, and for a moment, he thought maybe the story would end there. A man saves a child. Life goes on. No fanfare. Just another act of quiet bravery in a world that forgets too quickly. But as he looked up, toward the ridge where the fire had been, he felt something stir. Not fear. Not pride. Something quieter. Like a breath held too long finally being released. He didn't know it yet, but that child, that moment, that fire, had lit more than just gasoline and twisted metal. It had lit a fuse. And something was coming down that highway again. Not flames this time, but fortune. And fate. The days that followed drifted by like wood smoke, slow, scented with quiet, and hard to catch. Caleb returned to his work, though the bandages stayed on a while longer. He said little about the fire, and the town didn't press. Folks in Sable Creek believed in the dignity of silence. When a man saved a child from a burning car, it wasn't a tale to be passed around like gossip. It was a truth to be honored by not cheapening it. Elsie, too, had grown quieter. She watched her father with new eyes, curious, tender, maybe even proud, but she didn't say much. She just started drawing the boy from the fire. Over and over. Sometimes she gave him wings, sometimes a cape. But always he looked back at her from the page with wide eyes and soot-smudged cheeks. The boy never came back to town. There were no news reports. No visitors. No thank-you cards. Just the quiet return of routine, the rhythm of spark plugs and oil pans, and the soft chime of the bell over the garage door. Then one morning, just past 8, Caleb stepped outside with his second cup of coffee and saw it. The car wasn't from around here. Sleek, obsidian black, shining like sin against the dust and rust of Sable Creek. It didn't belong, too polished, too silent, like a ghost that had never known dirt. It parked just across the street, idling for a long moment before the door clicked open and a man stepped out. He wore a suit, tailored and dark, with a sharpness that looked out of place in the sleepy stretch of gravel road. His face was clean-shaven, his hair combed neatly back, but there was a hollow look in his eyes. Not the kind born of cruelty or coldness, more like someone who had forgotten how to breathe without pain. Caleb set the coffee down, wiped his hands on his jeans, and said nothing as the man crossed the road. "You're the mechanic," the stranger said after a beat, voice low and smooth, like old velvet worn at the seams. "That's what they tell me," Caleb replied. His tone wasn't cold, but it was cautious. The air had shifted. This man hadn't come to ask for a tune-up. The stranger glanced toward the garage, then back at Caleb. "You pulled my son out of the wreck." Caleb nodded once. "He all right?" "He's fine. No burns. Just shaken up. Won't talk much since it happened. But he's alive." The man exhaled slowly. "Because of you." There was a pause, long enough for the wind to tug at the man's coat and ruffle Caleb's shirt sleeves. "You got a name?" Caleb asked finally. "Lennox," the man said. "Evan Lennox." The name didn't ring a bell, but there was something about it that hung in the air like it should have meant something. Caleb didn't press. "You're not from around here," he said instead. "No," Lennox replied. "I've been away." He didn't explain where. But there was something in the way he said it, like a man returning from someplace far deeper than distance. Caleb didn't need more. Lennox asked if they could sit. Caleb gestured to 2 old chairs just outside the garage, their backs curved from sun and years. He fetched another mug of coffee, poured it full, and handed it over. For a time, they sat in companionable silence, broken only by the chirr of cicadas and the far-off bark of a dog. "I used to be in the light," Lennox said finally, without looking over. "Business. Media. Magazine covers. They called me a visionary. I had a wife who made everything make sense." Caleb said nothing, but his hand curled slowly around his mug. "She died 3 years ago. Cancer. Quiet kind. Took her fast." Lennox's voice cracked, barely, but it did. "After that, I took my son and disappeared. I didn't want the cameras watching us grieve. I didn't want people saying her name like it was just another story. I built walls. Hired tutors. Shut the world out. And then the car," Caleb said softly. "And then the car." Lennox turned to him. "That day, if you hadn't run into the fire, I just did what needed doing." "No," Lennox said more firmly now. "You did what most wouldn't." Caleb looked away, a slight tension in his jaw. "That boy's got someone who cares. That's all that matters." Lennox studied him then, long and careful, as though trying to match the man before him with all the ideas he'd imagined on the drive here. "You live above the garage?" he asked gently. "With my daughter," Caleb said. "It's enough." Lennox nodded. "She looks like her mama?" Caleb hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Got her eyes," But she's got my stubborn. Lennox chuckled once, then sobered. I came here because I needed to see the man who risked his life for my son. I expected someone different. Caleb raised an eyebrow. I don't know, Lennox admitted. Someone loud. Proud. Maybe a little self-righteous. Instead, I find a quiet man raising a daughter above a garage, who talks like the world still deserves kindness. There was no response to that. Just the hum of tires on faraway gravel. Lennox stood. He didn't reach for his wallet. Didn't offer a check. Just held out a card. If you ever need anything at all, you call that number. Direct line. Caleb took the card, glanced at it, then tucked it into his back pocket without a word. Lennox hesitated. You think he'll be okay? My son. He will, Caleb said simply. He saw someone run into the fire. That stays with a boy. Teaches him what people are capable of. Lennox didn't answer right away. He looked out at the garage, at the slow-moving sky, and for the first time, his shoulders softened just a little. I forgot people like you existed, he said quietly. Men who build instead of destroy. Caleb shrugged. Sometimes all we can do is fix what's in front of us. Lennox nodded. Thank you. For the fire. For today. And then he left. The car pulled away without spinning dust or making noise. Just a black blur returning to whatever shadows it had come from. Caleb stood there long after it disappeared, sipping coffee that had gone cold. When he walked back into the garage, Elsie looked up from her drawings. Who was that man, Daddy? He thought for a moment. Just someone looking for a reason to believe again. That night, Caleb found the card still in his pocket. He didn't call the number. He placed it on the table beside his wife's photo. Something had changed. He didn't know what it was, not yet. But he felt it in his bones, the way the air feels right before a summer storm. Something was coming. A shift. Not fire this time, but something stranger. Hope. Wrapped in suits and silence. And maybe, just maybe, a second chance. Summer deepened its hold on Sable Creek like a slow hand pressing into the land. The days came hot and left heavier, leaving behind mirages on the road and the smell of scorched rubber on sun-baked asphalt. The town moved slower now, like it respected the heat too much to rush. In the garage, Caleb worked with a familiar rhythm, though something in him had changed. He still fixed engines and balanced tires, but his mind wandered more than it used to, straying to the memory of the man in the black suit and the silent offer behind his eyes. Business had thinned. The trucks that rolled in now carried more dust than problems, and many of the locals did what they could themselves. Caleb didn't blame them. Times were tight, and kindness didn't fill a gas tank. Still, he kept the doors open, not out of pride, but because the garage was a part of him, his blood in the brick, his heartbeat in the hum of tools. Then came the letter. It was slipped under the door one morning, sealed in an envelope too clean for the dusty floor it rested on. Caleb peeled it open with the edge of a screwdriver. The words were polite. Cold. The land under the garage had been purchased by a development firm. The building would be reclaimed in 90 days. Renovated, repurposed, sterilized. No negotiation. He stood there a long time, the letter trembling just slightly in his hands. It wasn't the building, not really. It was what it held, his daughter's childhood, his memories of her mother, the feeling of purpose. He set the paper down and walked upstairs. Elsie sat at the little kitchen table, building a crown out of Sodic and tabs and yarn. She looked up at him with the ease of someone who never imagined the world might break in. Caleb knelt beside her, picked up one of the tabs, and looped it between his fingers. What would you say? He asked gently. If we had to move? She blinked. Move where? Somewhere smaller, he said. Maybe an apartment. Closer to town. She considered it, the way only children can, eyes squinting with questions she didn't yet know how to ask. Then her bottom lip quivered just slightly. But this is where we talk to Mama. He didn't answer. Just pulled her close and held her there, heart heavy with all the weight she didn't understand. The next few days passed like falling leaves, quiet and slow, with that strange hush that comes before a change. Caleb started packing things up little by little. A shelf here. A box of manuals there. But something inside him dragged its feet. It was the end of a long Wednesday when the knock came. He opened the door to find Lennox standing there again, no suit this time. Just a worn denim shirt rolled up to his elbows and boots that didn't match the shine he once wore. His son stood beside him, holding a small model car in both hands. Caleb stepped back to let them in without a word. They sat at the little table, the same one where Elsie had once braided string for angel dolls. The air smelled faintly of engine oil and warm bread, and the boy, quiet as ever, slid the toy car gently along the surface, tracing invisible roads. Lennox didn't speak right away. He watched the boy. There was a softness in him now, like something that had once been sealed had finally cracked open. "I heard about the garage," he said at last. Caleb nodded. "Developers. They always show up when you least need them." Caleb folded his arms. "Not much I can do. The land's gone." Lennox leaned forward. "What if it didn't have to be?" Caleb blinked. "What are you saying?" Lennox pulled a folder from his coat and laid it flat on the table. Inside were blueprints, not for apartments or strip malls, but for a new kind of garage. Bigger. Cleaner. With solar panels along the roof and work bays designed not just for service but for teaching. Next to the plans sat a simple letter of intent, an offer. "I've been thinking," Lennox said slowly, "about legacy. About how fast we build walls when we should be opening doors." Caleb watched him, unmoving. "I want to start something different," Lennox continued. "A chain of garages like this one. Not corporate. Not flashy. Just places where people can work and learn and get back on their feet. Veterans. Single parents. Men who've served time and want to start fresh." "And you want me to what?" Caleb asked. "Run it? I want you to be the foundation." Caleb sat back. The weight of the idea pressed against his chest like something too large to hold. "Why me?" "Because you saved my son," Lennox said plainly. "But more than that, you reminded me what matters. The world needs more people like you. Not in back corners of forgotten towns. In the light." The boy looked up from his car, eyes locking with Caleb's for the first time. He gave a tiny nod, a child's quiet vote of faith. Still, Caleb didn't answer. His heart beat hard in his ears, but his thoughts were clouds. He'd spent so long surviving, he wasn't sure he remembered how to dream. Lennox didn't press. He just pushed the folder gently toward him. "I'll be back in a few days," he said. "You don't have to decide now. Just read it. Think." They left together, father and son walking down the stairs and into the fading light. The last slant of sun touched the edge of the garage roof, painting the rust in gold. Caleb stood at the window long after they'd gone, the folder unopened beside him, his daughter's drawings fluttering gently on the wall. That night, he sat beside Elsie's bed as she slept, her small chest rising and falling in the easy rhythm of dreams. He held the folder on his lap but didn't open it. He looked instead at the photograph on the nightstand, the one with his wife in her blue dress, laughing mid-turn, like the world couldn't touch her. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "It's big. Too big." He stared at the paper for a long time, then back at the room, the peeling walls and humming fridge, the life they had built brick by brick, grief by grief. "But maybe it's time," he said. And though the silence gave no answer, something inside him shifted. Not certainty. Not peace. But a spark. Like the last light before the dusk gives way. Like dust floating in a sunbeam. Like the first breath before a man says yes.